Welcome to another episode, Farm and Home DIY, where we're going to show you how to do a washer repair yourself, and yes, you can do it. Okay, the first thing you're going to want to do when you're going to want to replace this pump on your Kenmore Elite, LG makes this, Samsung makes one, and the repair is basically the same. And this symptom will be you're getting a code and your water that's inside the tank simply won't pump out. Okay, so most of the time it's going to end up being a simple pump issue, and the repair is not as difficult as anyone would think. Okay, so we're going to remove this door first. You're going to find 6 screws, you're going to zip them off, and this door will pull up and off. Very simple to remove. You'll notice that there's little hooks that go into these levers. That's why you're pulling up and off. It's very helpful for reinstallation, and we'll talk about that during the reinstall. Now once that's done, you're going to pull out our laundry detergent container. Just pull it out, push down on that little blue tab right there, and that whole thing will pull out. Now your top cover in the back of the washer has a screw in each of these backing plates, these little plastic plates. All you're going to do is zip the screw out. There's one on each side. This is the other plastic plate. Just zip that screw out, and then this whole top plate will pull backwards. It's very easy to remove. So you'll see I slid it back. Just slide it back, pull it off. Now you'll be able to look down into your washer. Again, very simple. You've just pulled 6 screws out for the door, pulled it out. You pulled 1 screw out of the back of each, slid the back off. This is, no kidding, very quick, very easy job. Now at this point, this is screws. There's one over here and one over on this side that are holding this front cover on. Okay? So that little screw right there, it's a little Phillips, and there's one on each end. Just zip that out. Now once that's out, there's a screw here and there's a screw here. Zip that out. Now once that's off, you'll be able to pull this panel forward. Okay? All you've got to do is reach behind it, and you'll be reaching on this side. Just give it a couple of tugs. It's just some plastic clips holding it in. Once the screws are off, you'll be able to pull this. I didn't even unplug it. I just pulled it off and laid it on top of the washer. It was very easy to get that off. And this is what it looks like, just sitting on the top, plugged in. Again, messing with the connectors could break the connectors, so if there's no need, let's just leave it plugged in. Now, you're going to have screws here, 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 all the way across. Zip those out. I used an electric screwdriver and just zipped them out. Real strong advice, have a magnetic container to put the screws in nearby so that screws don't get lost. It'll be a lot easier to put things back together. But we're just zipping these front screws off. So we've pulled the front cover. It was very easy. It's nothing to be afraid of. We're zipping these top screws off. Now in the bottom left corner of the washer, you have this little door that you can pull off. Okay, this right here is a filter. Screw it out, turn it counterclockwise in that direction, and this right here is a drain. Now again, if you drain the hose, you can see a lot of water. Where I have my washer, it doesn't matter. I've got concrete under it, but you want to make sure you're prepared for water that's going to drain. And there's the container. Notice I left the screw in there. I like to leave screws where I can get to them as much as possible. And once again, we're going to screw that out. And that's your trap. That's what would trap any debris from getting into your pump. Put that off to the side. Now this hose, watch it carefully, because in the case of this one, right in this location, there was a little crack. Okay, now if you notice that, it's not a big deal. There's plenty of hose. All I needed to do was clip it where the clack was. There was plenty of hose left. But if you don't catch that right away and there's a crack there, you're going to end up with water leakage. So check that hose over good before you put everything back together. Now, before we pull the whole cover off, we do need to release the spring around this seal. In fact, I'm going to be replacing this seal. I would strongly suggest that you go online. You can go to Amazon, eBay, and look up the washer spring tool. Without this tool, I'm not going to say it's impossible. You will see guys do it, but trust me, the frustration will drive you nuts. With the tool, all you've got to do is put the tool on each side, squeeze it, it'll release, and you can pull this ring off the front of the seal. You can see that's the front ring. There's another one in the back, but that's the front ring. With the tool, this is very easy. Now the front ring, if you're not going to be replacing the seal, the front ring may be able to be reused depending upon how much water has gotten in there. But I'm going to tell you, on this one, the original spring that came off was almost rusted through. So if there's any doubt, look at it before you take it apart. These can be easily bought. I bought all the stuff I needed for this off Amazon. You can get it off eBay. You can get them just about anywhere. But I would strongly suggest having the tools. As long as you're going to be replacing the pump, I would replace the seal. Believe me, anybody can do it. You don't have to be a techie person or a mechanical person to replace this. You'll pull this ring off, and now we're just going to peel this seal back. There you can see I'm just peeling the seal off. I'm going to peel it off all the way around to release the seal from this front cover. With the front cover, I'm standing behind it looking down. There are little clips this goes into. This front cover sets in. And I believe I've got a better photo. These clips, you see how rusty that is? So with that rust, as I'm pulling this back, sometimes what will happen is that rust will keep you from being able to pull the cover off of these lips. So all I needed to do was spray some penetrant oil down in there, and I used the pry bar from underneath to pry up on the front cover so I could release it and pull it off. Going back, where these little latches were right at the bottom of the front cover. As you pull the front cover forward, you'll see that there's 4 lips that it sits on. It should just lift off, but if it's rusted, it'll catch. You put a pry bar right underneath this and pop up, and it'll pop that front cover loose. Now once that cover is loose, you have to make sure and unplug this connector. Now there is a latch holding this connector on, and as you can see, it's broke. It didn't take much for me to break that latch, so be really gentle pulling the latch. Unplug that connector. You're going to want that unplugged so you can get the cover out of your way. Now what I'm using to get the pump out, I'm using a 10mm 3/8 socket, and I'm using an electric battery operated ratchet. Okay, so where the pump is located right behind this hole. And behind this hole, there are 3 bolts holding the pump in. Once again, a 10mm ratchet to go back behind. And I used just my camera to go over there. There's 3 10mm bolts holding the pump assembly down in on the left-hand lower corner of the washer. All I needed to do is put the socket in there and use that electric ratchet to zip these 10mm bolts out. Now once they're out, there's going to be some connections to unplug. There's going to be a couple on each side. I recommend taking photos. Now you can use mine to make sure we put the right color wire back in the right spot. Because to replace this pump, we are going to want those connections unplugged. Just to be clear, you're going to see guys try to do this from underneath without taking the cover off, without taking the top. Trust me, it takes no time at all to get these parts off. And it'll make it so much easier to get this pump out. So I wanted to show you those 10 bolts that are holding the pump down in. There's one here, one here, these 3 bolts, and then there's another one on the back side, and they have this rubber grommet. It's real easy for these to fall out. So keep an eye on your washer. These need to be there when we go to put it back in. Okay? Now this is the other side connector. I told you there's connectors on each side. This is the other side. Again, either take a picture or use this one. We do want to make sure the right color wires plug back into the right spot on the pump. And remember this lip, when we go to put it back together, we want to make sure that this wire goes through this lip. That keeps the wiring out of the way from chafing. But we're going to unplug it, get it out of the way so we can pull the pump assembly. Now, on the pump assembly, there are screws holding it to the housing. Okay? There's one screw, there's another. We need to pull those screws out in order to get the pump off. So you're going to pull that screw, you're going to pull that screw. There's a better picture of it there. Once we pull those off, don't try to separate this white bracket from the pump until you get the pump out of the washer. Once you get the pump out of the washer, the two of them will come out together. If you try to separate it in the washer, it's just going to frustrate you. So once the screws are out, the pump and this white cover are going to come out together as an assembly. And that's what they'll look like. Now once they're off, it's not difficult at all to get your pump, this little white cover that you're going to reuse, separated from your pump. Now here's a key thing. The new pump may or may not come with the O-ring actually installed, so double check. The pump I bought came with an O-ring, but you want to make sure it comes installed, because if it's not, you're going to put this pump in, it's going to leak like a sieve. So we want to make sure this O-ring is on the new pump and lube it. I use a dielectric grease to lube it so it goes back in easy without damaging that O-ring. There you can see the O-ring installed. And once again, once I've put the new pump on, I got the plastic cover. I've put the new pump, the new O-ring, I got the plastic cover back on the new pump. I want to make sure that these grommets are on the mount that this pump's going to go bolt back onto. If any of them fell off, they'll be sitting right down below. Put these grommets back in before you put line your pump back up to put the screws back in. And there is my pump. Keep in mind, this pump housing has some hoses going to it. Again, if you don't remove this whole assembly, I just tilted it as I showed just a moment ago and pulled the screws out, left this assembly in the washer. That way I don't have to mess with all these hoses. And it was plenty easy to do. To tilt it, there's plenty of room. Zip the screws out, pull the pump, replace the seal as we talked about, put it back in, put your screws back in, and then plug these two connectors back in the way they came off. In that case, you don't have to mess with all these hoses. Okay, and there again, I have my socket. I started all 3 of the bolts by hand with my socket, and then I went ahead and let my electric battery-powered ratchet tighten those down. And then my pump is back in and ready to go as far as the pump goes. Now, when I go to reinstall the cover, okay, if we're not going to replace this seal, if we're not going to do that, we can put the cover back on at this time. You see the lips at the bottom? We're going to put the cover right back over the lips. Now, once again, I recommend replacing this seal. Now, replacing this seal is no different in the ring than taking that first ring off. Okay? Here's the spring in the back. Now, this spring in the back, I would strongly recommend getting that new as well. Okay? You could reuse it. I hadn't seen this one seriously rusted, but I didn't want to reuse the spring. But it removes the same way. You put the same tool in place, spread it, pull the spring off. Now you're going to notice that there is a hose here with a clamp. You're going to need to remove that clamp and hose. There's one here. There's one on the bottom. There's one on the left. Once you have those hoses out and the ring off, you'll be able to pull this thing off. Okay? Now when you pull it off, it's going to come with these two holes empty. Your new one is going to have these two holes empty. You're going to need to push this yellow piece out of there, out of the seal, and push it back up in the new one. It's very simple, very easy to do. Okay? And once you have those back in your new seal, okay, you're going to take and push this new seal back on. It's very simple. There's a little lip. You'll push it over all the way around. And once that's put on, you can take this ring, put it over the top, clip it right back where it belonged. And if you have this tool, it's very easy to put that ring back on. If you don't have the tool, you're going to be extremely frustrated. Okay? Now, I had heard some guys talk about lubing this seal to put it on. I didn't have any trouble putting the seal on, folks. Picking the seal off, putting the seal back on, very easy. It required no lube. The one thing I can tell you that would have been a serious struggle is this spring, okay, without that tool. With the tool, it's very simple. And if you put the spring back in the exact same spot you took it off, you won't have any issues. So now I've got my new seal and spring on the back. Okay, and you can see how nice and clean it is. It gets all that slime out of there. And I'm going to put the cover again over those lips. And then I'm going to push the cover forward. And then we'll have to, we can put the screws in, but then we'll have to get this seal back around this lip and put the outer spring on. Now, as I push this forward, before I secure the screws, let's make sure we plug that connector back in. At this point, you can go ahead and put all your screws in across the top so that this is in a nice secure spot so that you can put this seal back on without this flopping around. Now we're going to take the seal and use your finger to pull this lip, and there's a lip that's going to go right over that ledge of the cover. Okay, you get it started in one spot and then you can slowly work your way around. Again, it didn't require any lube. My thought about the lube is it's going to slide off too easy, especially when you go to put that spring on. So my recommendation is you can leave it dry, just get it started in one spot and work your way around. And you can see I've worked my way all the way around. I just got a little bit left to seat all the rest of this in that lip. And that's what it's going to look like when I'm done. And what I do is I just grab hold here and tug all the way around. That way I know that it's in its lip all the way around the seal. Now, a couple of interesting things about this. Number one, you want to get your tool in there good and tight. Spread that spring out, okay, and you're going to have to use your fingers to work that spring right into this lip all the way around. Get it down in there. Now, if you didn't remember where you took it off, the thought is, well, I can put that spring anywhere. Thing is, if you try and put it anywhere but the bottom slot where it belongs, it's not going to seat. So I'm going to show you where it goes. This is where the spring goes. You see that little slot? There's a little slot there, a little slot there. This is where the spring, when you get it all lipped in and you're going to release your tool, that's where you release it and pull your tool out. And again, give it a good tug all the way around to make sure that that got in its lip. Now you've replaced your seal, your pump, your cover's part way back on. With the cover back on, we can put this white bracket back in place. We can put our hose back in place. Be sure that that plug is there, okay? Otherwise, you're going to have water running. And we make sure to get the drain back in and that little screw put back in that hole. And then we can go ahead and close that cover. Now remember, we've got screws all the way across here that we've got to put back in before we put the cover back on. Remember, as you put your cover back on, these little plastic pieces are going to go down in the slots of the cover. So to be clear, these little plastic levers that you see right here go into those holes, and then you can push that whole cover forward and it'll almost snap into place even though you don't have the screws in yet. Once you've put your cover back on, remember we need to reattach those 2 screws. I really recommend as you're putting these screws back in, you hand turn these with a regular Phillips. A power screwdriver may strip these out. Remember, it's screws going into plastic. And remember, on the back side of the cover, we have those 2 Phillips screwdrivers or screws on each side. So you'll have the 2 screws that go in where the laundry detergent is, and you'll have 2 screws on the back side of the cover, 1 on each side. Now that cover is back on and secure. Once that's back on and secure, you can take your laundry detergent tray, push that button down, and push it all the way back in. Now remember, the door has these little levers on it, and these go into this slot. So you don't have to fight trying to hold the door and put the screws in. You just put those, line them up with the slots, set it down in. The door will hold itself on while you put the 6 screws back in. Put your 6 screws back in and make sure they're good and tight. I can put the laundry thing back in just like we talked about. I've got my back screws in. Now I can take my cover and put it over the top and slide it forward so it locks back into place. Remember, once it's on, it'll slide right forward and fit nice and snug into a little slot right here, and then I can put the screws back in the back. We'll reinstall this screw. We'll reinstall that screw. Okay, so you've now got your front cover on, okay? And I want to make sure we're clear. We've got the back screws back in. We put our screws back in front. We put the screws in for this housing. We put the detergent cover back in. We put the white housing back in. We put the little catcher. We've got our hose and plug back in place. We've got everything put back together like it was when we started. And we can plug this thing back in. Now, one thing you should know, I like to give all the tidbits. Water is going to go through this seal that you put in. And I noticed the first time I use it, it takes a while for that to refill and water to get back in. So it was perfectly normal. It's been operating well ever since. I also wanted to show you something unique on this seal so you don't make the mistake that I did. The first time I put this seal in, I always like to inspect the components and compare what I buy to what comes out. Okay? And everything was perfectly good. Everything looked good. But I noticed this bottom hose, where the hose plugged in, I looked up in the new part, and there was no place for the water to go. There was a formation in there where it looked like there's no place for it to go. So I decided, well, this new seal must be formed wrong, so I put my own hole there. Okay, so that there would be a place for this water to drain. Just be clear, I made a place for water to leak on the floor. Okay, and I want people to know the mistakes made as well when these are done, so you don't make the same mistake. I ordered a new seal, put the new seal in. It had the same exact formation the other one did. Okay, so put that on. Washer has been working flawlessly. So if you notice that bottom hose when you order yours, it does look like there's no place for the water to go. I want to be clear, if you pull that seal down far enough, you can see, yes, there is a gap. There is a place for it to go, so don't make the mistake that I made. Okay, but once that's all done, I like to just take and run this in its fastest cycle, express wash. Bottom line, I just want to make sure that the water can get in there, the soap can get in there. I want to make sure it can pump out when it's done. And folks, you can buy the seal and the pump and everything that's needed to do this. You can buy it from Amazon. It all worked. Okay, and it was a fraction of the cost. And it was the same parts that I would have got anyplace else. So they can be bought at Amazon. They can be bought at eBay. There's lots of sites. Yes, I could buy the factory ones and no kidding, pay almost 3 times the amount. The ones I did buy worked fine. Hopefully, this gives somebody the confidence to do this themselves. It is a very easy job. And in fact, there are other things that can be done on this washer by a do-it-yourselfer. And if it's ever necessary, we'll cover that in the future. Hey, if you like this video, if you think it's going to help you, if you would just click like on it, click subscribe. That helps those of us that want to help you get more content out there.